All right, good evening, everybody. It's Steve with Real Progressives. I am back with my good friend Mike Sainato tonight. Very exciting. We haven't talked in a while, but Mike's always got something good going on. Before we get started, though, I want to thank everybody for this past weekend. As you know, Real Progressives came out in force to UMKC to represent at the first annual World MMT conference. We got to hang out with Stephanie Kelton, Warren Mosler, Randall Ray, Bill Mitchell, and my goodness, Fidel Kaboub. I got to sit down and have a long talk with none other than Dr. William Black. Bill Black, you'll know him from the Keating Five, and man is single-handedly chased after corruption more than anybody I've ever met. It was a fantastic time. And I'm very, very excited to be partners with all those folks. So we look forward to doing big things in the future. Without further ado, though, let me bring on my trusty friend here, the best writer I know in the movement, Mike Sainato. Welcome to the show, sir. How you been, man?
Hi, Steve. I've been all right.
So talk to me, man. I've been on a rant lately, and I'm going to stay there until I see something change about Puerto Rico. And the fact that you've got people that are part of the United States. I mean, you wave these flags all over the place. You bitch and moan about Colin Kaepernick taking a knee during a football game and other athletes taking a knee during a football game. But here we have a U.S. territory that is literally in less than third world conditions right now. They've got no food. They've got no electricity, got no transportation. People can't get around. I mean, what's your take on this?
It's ridiculous, obviously. There's been a couple good articles out there, but they've really been shoved under all the garbage that's being put out about Puerto Rico. And really, this better than I do, that there's no excuse for not only the debt crisis or the hurricane damage. Just give them the money. You have the money. You can print the money. The U.S. has the means to do that. That's really all it needs. Is Puerto Rico needs capital, and they're at the mercy of this board of directors who's in charge of managing their debt. A bunch of dorky accountants, and Puerto Rico's screwed over. They couldn't file for bankruptcy in the same way that like Detroit did. They're not they're not a foreign country, so they can't just declare bankruptcy that way and then rebuild up their debt. And then the Associated Press reported that they only allocated $1 billion for Puerto Rico's relief. And there was an article in the Wall Street Journal today that a lot of food and medicine and aid is just sitting in the port of Puerto Rico, but they have no way of getting it out, getting it to the people. It's been there since Saturday. So they have these huge boxes and tanks of aid, and they have no means to do it because they don't have the gas for the trucks. The infrastructure is, destroyed. The roads don't work. Trucks can't run, even if they do, have any trucks or truck drivers. Everything's in a standstill, and you have idiots like Trump running things. And his administration that are completely inept to be able to figure any of this stuff out. So it's like Hurricane Katrina all over again. But the Democrats aren't doing anything to help it. They're doing, they're helping and to the extent that it helps themselves. A lot of political theater. You saw earlier today they had people in Congress kneeling as though that's going to do anything, and they're appropriating that protest just to even go over from Puerto Rico to talk about that again. They're co-opting Colin Kaepernick's protest. It was about racism. It was about police brutality. Now, because Trump said something about it, now they're making it about Trump. And I saw this past weekend you had every establishment talking head idiot try to rebrand Kaepernick's protest as an anti-Trump protest, and these are the same people who, ignored his protest, never stood up. Even the NFL owners that kneeled, and the coaches. Colin Kaepernick is still unemployed, because of what he was protesting, not because, Trump. He started it out when Obama was president. And so in August 2016 is when Kaepernick started. He explained in an interview, he said, in August, I'm not going to stand up to show pride in the flag for a country that oppresses black people and people of color. To me, this is bigger than football, and it would be selfish on my part to look the other way. There are bodies in the street, people getting paid, leave, and getting away with murder. He added, murder. This is not something that I'm going to run by anybody. I'm not looking for approval. I have to stand up for people that are oppressed. If they take football away, my endorsements from me, I know that I stood up for what is right. And, they did. So, and they're still killing people. We have the St. Louis protests that have been going on in response to the Jason Stockley verdict, where he, overtly, killed an unarmed black man and, planted a gun. They have the camera of him reaching in a duffel bag, planting a gun. They only found DNA on that gun. And he, broke police protocol, and he had an AK-47 type rifle. He broke the rules in that, and briefly, while he was, chasing after this guy, said, "I'm going to kill this motherfucker." And he did. And the St. Louis police are harassing protesters. They're, antagonizing them. You look on their Twitter; it looks exactly like the Morton County was during the standing.
Well, I want to take a moment to actually show you Jeff Spross, who is from The Week. Jeff Spross is a great writer. I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to work with him or read his stuff, but I want to go ahead and show you this. Give me 1 second. I will go ahead and put this up. So if we take this. Going to go ahead and see if I can show you this. Okay, well, I'm going to bring Mike back. BeLive's acting like a chump here real quickly. I was trying to show them the article, but if you give me a moment, I'll go ahead and read this thing to you because I think it's important, bringing it back to Puerto Rico momentarily. Mike, if you would mind, I'm going to go ahead and we'll bring this up here while we wait for Mike to come back on. So, folks, while we're waiting for that to come back on, I'm going to go ahead and read to you a little bit about the Puerto Rican issue. So this article by Jeff Spross is called How to Save Puerto Rico. And just quickly off the top, he says, Hurricane Maria decimated the U.S. territory of Puerto Rico. The entire island of nearly 3.5 million Americans could be without power for 4 to 6 months. 4 to 6 months! Nearly all wireless services down, roads across the island are unusable, and major dam might collapse. Elected officials call the situation apocalyptic. Puerto Rico's economy was already in shambles before Maria hit, thanks to a decade-long recession and resulting debt crisis. And the fixes U.S. policymakers have put in motion could well ensure that the island never recovers from Maria's wrath. The bitter perversity is that the solution to both problems, fixing the damage from both the debt crisis and hurricane, is simple. Just spend the money necessary to repair Puerto Rico's society. All that stands in the way are policy myths, economic ignorance, and blinkered ideologies. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, to me, there's literally nothing more disgusting than people that peddle economic myths and lies, because now you're watching people literally die from ignorance. There's no excuse for an economic illiteracy that attacks our nation. There's literally no excuse for it at all. I find it shameful. I find it damning. And I find those people that peddle all the bullshit really are lethal murderers. Mike, now you join back, sir. I just went on a rant again because I just literally can't stand it. Look, for our audience's purposes, the island nation of Puerto Rico is basically like Greece at this point. It literally has no means of survival without direct intervention from either our federal government or some other foreign source. And guess what? All the foreign sources are blocked from actually providing aid based on a Jones law from way, way back. I mean, like 100-year-old law. And you know what? Quite frankly, we don't need foreign aid. We need the United States government to step up. This right here is exactly why we can't have Medicare for all, why we can't have student debt relief, and why we can't have a host of other things like green energy. That it just is so unconscionable, Mike. Have you heard anybody within the Democratic Party or any of your other sources, have you heard anyone speaking about the fact that we can afford anything we need right now, especially life-saving, island-saving services? Have you heard anyone even mention it other than someone like Jeff Spross?
No, and most of the aid is, they delayed it until October. That's when they're going to pass an aid package for it finally. And we both know it's going to be, grossly insufficient. Before this hurricane even hit, Puerto Rico was in a huge debt crisis, and it was being ignored, even under the Obama administration. And vulture hedge funds were swooping into Puerto Rico to capitalize on the debt crisis. They were buying up bonds after prices dropped, and they've been in court trying to recover as close to their bond values as possible. Obama in June 2016 signed this Puerto Rico Oversight Management and Economic Stability Act, which is complete bullshit. It is bipartisan. It forced those hedge funds to negotiate with the government. It keeps the territory reliant on lawyers and consultants, and they don't get any of that new revenue that they need to get out of that crisis. So they put that territory's economy on hold already. Infrastructure projects were stopped. Health projects were stopped. The university, they've been suffering a brain drain. The Puerto Rico University, they've had protests, student protests, staff have resigned. There's huge funding shortages there, and that's the center of their economy. If the people don't have, the students don't have a college to go to, they're going to go into the U.S. to go to college, and then going to stay there because the opportunities just aren't there in Puerto Rico, and that's just driving Puerto Rico's economy in the tank in the long term. You've had mass migration from Puerto Rico because of this crisis, and this hurricane disaster is making everything worse. Like I said before, they can't file Chapter 9 bankruptcy. They've had drastic education cuts. 80 and right now 80% of the transmission power lines have been destroyed. The Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, they're already $9 billion in debt, so they don't have the resources to build. And like you said, they're expect to be out of power for 4 to 6 months. The places that do have power are relying on generators, and those are short-term solutions. So this is one of the worst humanitarian disasters in the United States history, probably since Katrina. Possibly even to greater. And no one's doing anything about it. So we have people on both aisles who don't care.
Well, let me ask you this. So obviously, we've seen what Clinton-style support looks like down there in Haiti, where they went down there and pilfered the damn island. They did absolutely nothing useful to help the people out. here we are in a situation where you have private foundations drumming up money. Of course, there's all that administrative cost and all the overhead and all the other money funneling into pet projects that has nothing to do with actually saving a single life or making life better of a single human being. But I want to look at this. Let's take a walk through the last couple of weeks where we've had Hurricane Harvey, we've had Irma, we've now had Maria. We had a huge seismic activity off the coast of Japan. We have also seen a 1.3 trillion piece of ice break off in the Antarctic. We have had so many climate-related issues that have happened in the recent weeks, much less months. And people are still sitting there literally waxing on about debt and how are we going to pay for it. And it is really, in my opinion, it's gotten to the point where this lie is of a humanitarian crisis now. I guess when I look around at all the crises that are brewing in our country and around the world, but let's just stay within the country. I mean, you've got, when's the last time anybody has spoken about the water situation in Flint, Michigan? It has largely gone completely unreported. It's basically out of sight, out of mind. We have got a host of these things. And, I didn't do the reporting. I'm not, the guy running around chasing these stories, but there are many other places that have Flint-like conditions that are going on too. So while we have dilapidated infrastructure that is literally crumbling to the ground because of neoliberalism, we also have the lie, the myth that we have to fund spending with taxes. So now we're sitting here watching firsthand that we just dropped 700 billion on the military, and we have nothing to show for it domestically. Yet we could sit there without any question and come up with no tax hikes, but $700 billion new dollars for the military. But we can't come up with any kind of real solution for Puerto Rico or Flint or any of the other states that are falling apart. At what point in time, Mike, will the economic narrative in this country become important enough that it is reported by the media, that it is bought into by our activists, that the political parties stop lying and stop putting death ahead? I mean, it's ridiculous. I don't understand what it will take to push this narrative to the future. But right now, you're witnessing the suffering of the Puerto Rican people as a direct result of these lies.
I think for some issues, they're starting to. For single payer Medicare for all, you had all these concern trolls asking, "The hell will you pay for it?" And people, I've saw people pile onto those people, and really push back against those really stupid bullshit concerns about how you fund this. And unfortunately, even Bernie, gave into the we'll have a lot of tax increases here and here to fund it. Really giving into the whole myth of that. That there's this huge, this debt crisis. There's this fear mongering, overspending to really keep the plebeians at bay, to keep them not wanting more. Oh, you want that? Oh, we can't afford it. And that's been the attitude for decades. And I think people are starting to wake up and starting to get sick of it. It's like, oh no, we can. You're spending. You don't have any issues. Spending on private jets to wheel around the health secretary or boost funding. It was Trump asked for $640 billion, and Congress was like, "We'll make it $700 billion." And there's no, there's no debate on like, all right, we're gonna have to figure out where this money's gonna come from. They know it's there. So I think that's one of the biggest issues. It's not like they had like this huge debate, like, all right, we're gonna have to cut stuff to figure this out. We have a finite amount of money and resources. What's how do we get the $60 billion extra? And you didn't have people trying to work that out. It's there. They know it's there. They know it's there.
So, well, let's talk about something else too, because one of the things that brought us together at Real Progressives is the fact that you are an adamant environmentalist, and it's something that drives your life. It drives your behavior. It drives everything about the way you live. What is the environmental impact right now? What the ecological impact, the wildlife, the animal population in places like Puerto Rico and Harvey and other areas, St. Croix. I mean, have we heard anything? I mean, we hear about the humanitarian crisis, but I imagine there's a lot of pestilence too, with dead animals laying around, stinking up the place, friggin' rotting, and disease possibilities. I mean, have you heard anything about the state of affairs for the animal life?
Well, nature's pretty resilient with hurricanes. The damage really has to do with infrastructure and what people build. I did a story for the Real News a couple weeks ago on there's a Native American woman who posted on Facebook a bunch of stories on how the Seminoles and the Miccosukee in South Florida, how they dealt with hurricanes. One of the interesting things, from that story was that they take, they obviously didn't have the technology to figure out, a hurricane's coming, but they knew by the salt palmettos blossoming that a hurricane was coming. So that gave them a heads up, and they built these tunnels off of the fronds of these salt palmettos, and then they put their canoes over their heads, and they these things, these hurricanes without much damage. The Everglades is in South Florida is a buffer for hurricanes. They need to preserve the Everglades. And that was an issue with Hurricane Katrina, the wetlands disappearing, just south of New Orleans, and those are the buffers. So as we're destroying these places, places like Miami and New Orleans are more susceptible to hurricane damage because those buffer zones, those natural buffer zones that protect these areas, are being destroyed. As for the animals, I saw in Puerto Rico there's like a research center for monkeys, but I don't really know too much about that. I know there for Puerto Rico, because it's an island, they have biodiversity that's unique to that island. And I think there was a parrot that's endangered, and they think it might be extinct now because of the hurricane. It's always an issue, and that's an issue that conservation and wildlife management needs to figure out. In Florida, now I did a story last year about this endangered butterfly, how in Hurricane wiped out in the wild, and with Hurricane Irma, it was probably a similar thing, but they have a captive breeding program at the University of Florida to make, and they go down there with these butterflies and release them to make sure that they can eventually stabilize a population. But as you have these huge storms, these huge hurricanes, because of climate change, that they're emerging as more powerful, they're more frequent. I interviewed Dr. Michael Mann a couple weeks ago about it, and we were long past what the natural frequency is with these hurricanes and the intensity. The hurricanes this season, the water was a little more than a degree above the average. So you have warmer ocean temperatures, you're going to have more powerful hurricanes. I live in Florida, so it's a concern to anyone living in these coastal regions where these things are just going to become worse and worse. So we haven't, and hurricane season's not even over. We have another month, so who knows what's out there still, unfortunately.
Okay, so let's talk about the NFL for a minute. Obviously, in this country, we have a lot of distractions going on. The NFL has been between baseball and football, it has been America's pastime for quite some time. Obviously, many people follow football. It's a source of opportunity for families to come together and friends to come together and kind of forget about all the troubles of the world and just focus on this basically meaningless game. but it's now become a lot more than that. You know, with the struggle of Colin Kaepernick and taking a knee, it's gone to all the different teams in the NFL. You know, you've got Jerry Jones down in Dallas who's acting a fool. You've got Donald Trump doing what Donald Trump does with his moronic tweets. Can you frame the argument right now? Can you frame the narrative for us and kind of take us through what is going on? Because obviously, let me just say obviously, two white guys sitting here talking about the struggle of minorities probably is maybe the worst optic of all time, but it is what we've got. And the fact is that we are two allies. So can you frame this out for our audience?
Basically the Kaepernick protests were being ignored until Trump said at a rally last Friday in Alabama. He didn't name Kaepernick by name, but he called a son of a bitch. And those comments incited a backlash from the Trump resistance, not only from people who actually support Kaepernick, which obviously we do. And I don't know if I got cut off, but I read what Kaepernick said in August 2016 when he started the protest. That it's against police brutality and racism, and he said right there and then, like, if they take away my endorsements, if they take away football from me, then I know what I was doing was right. And that the establishment, even no matter how unpopular Trump is, they're not going to support something like that. They historically haven't. Dr. Martin Luther King, people on Twitter, making this point that he was unpopular in the mainstream media and the establishment when he was around. The mainstream media outlets constantly attacked him and tried to undermine the efforts of what he was doing. In this context with Trump, you've had, I think, David Corn at Mother Jones. You've had other Democrat establishment talking heads tried to say, like, all right, now kneeling is a sign against the Trump resistance. When these people are complicit with white supremacy, and they promote it, they expand it, they're not doing anything to try to hold that in check, to dismantle white supremacy. And you see this with all the NFL owners and the coaches that were doing for the optics, kneeling with their players and trying to show solidarity against Trump because Trump is unpopular. And they were doing that, but Kaepernick still isn't hired. Like I said before, the St. Louis protests, the protesters are still harassed and criminalized. Police officers are still getting away with murder. So, these issues aren't really being addressed. You had, even Democrats in Congress for political theater when, they should be pushing criminal justice reform, police reform in the same way that Bernie Sanders is pushing single payer. He should be doing that as well. But the main issues of these protests have really been swept under the rug and appropriated as like a Trump resistance bullshit.
So let me ask you a question, because I've kind of come to the belief, and I know I'm partially right, but I want to get your take on this. Okay, I think most police departments are underfunded. And I think most police departments, if you look down there at Ferguson, for example, Ferguson is heavily funded by fines and steep, very draconian laws that catch people to, and they thrive off of taking very, very poor people and making them much poorer through fining them to death by 1,000 cuts. And so my thoughts are that so much of what we see today is a direct result of austerity hitting the states, austerity hitting these police departments, because quite frankly, if they were funded, they could hire and attract people that were willing to do these jobs in a different fashion. Community policing, the people that they're going after 9 times out of 10 are criminals by accident. They are put into a situation where, the economy has failed them and they're doing whatever it is that they can to survive. So what is your take on the police brutality situation in this country? I know so much of it is steeped in racism or systemic racism, because you even see African American cops joining in the fun once they enter into that blue wall, you know. So what is your take on what the genesis of the police state and the actual systematic or systemic racism is that Colin Kaepernick's actually fighting against?
Well, it's systemic. And you know, with these St. Louis protests, you know, you've had even mainstream media outlets really concerned troll about the violence and the economic impacts of St. Louis, but those are the goals of the protest, because the protesters, you know, from what I perceive, are trying to make it apparent to the city and the county of St. Louis that it's going to cost more not to, you know, hold, you know, police who murder unarmed Black people accountable than it is not to, and it should be. You know, you have you know, police departments that are focus on you know, communities of color. You know, they perpetuate a mass incarceration system. You know, and those, you know, those two things are interlinked. So, you know, corporations, you know, and, you know, private interest profit off of getting people in jail. You know, you have you know, a huge problem of people just pleading guilty because, you know, if they risk going to trial, then they get you know, put in jail even more, or they don't have, you know, funding for a lawyer or anything like that. So you know, any, you know, people of low income, marginalized communities are really just at the mercy of a system that is designed to oppress them. And it's designed to protect white supremacy at all costs. You see this with the police officers in general. You know, it's unbelievable to me that you could see those people in riot gear. And, you know, how could you don riot gear like that and think like, oh, I'm doing the right thing? You know, this is a good thing I'm doing. I'm on the right side. Police in riot gear have never been on the right side of history. And it's really part of the system that, you know, gets these people who are, you know, willing to, you know, protect the, you know, white supremacy and, you know, the corporate interests of the whole system that, you know, keep it together. In this whole, you know, police culture, the Blue Lives Matter, that is all, you know, in design to, you know, keep that machine going. And it really is just predicated on, you know, racism, and that the whole system just needs to go. It's not just a few bad apples. Michael Wood Jr., I'm sure most people watching this know who he is, former Baltimore police officer. You know, he's a pretty good voice on these issues and what needs to be done in terms of police reform and getting to community. And when you have in St. Louis, you have just a really, really, really bad police department. You know, it's not an accident that Ferguson and the protests now happen there. You know, you look at the statistics; they kill unarmed people all the time. You know, and there's stories coming out of there all the time. Just with these protests, you know, there were one tweet from the St. They had these bottles, and they were like, "Oh, look at these unknown chemicals that were confiscated." But you just zoom in a little bit; it says apple cider vinegar. So they have bottles of apple cider vinegar they confiscated, and that apple cider vinegar is used by protesters to alleviate the symptoms of mace and pepper spray that the police are using. You know, and the police this past weekend, they used this thing called kettling, which is just you know, the whole from the civil rights. They just go in with clubs and mace, and they're just beating the shit out of anyone they could find. They beat the shit out of an Air Force officer who wasn't even doing anything. They beat the shit out of an undercover cop. You know, these cops are, and you know, the people, you know, running the show, the whole system, you know, and the whole militarization of it, it is absolutely disgusting. But you have scenes like that, and people don't even care. You know, you look at the stories. There's not, you know, Puerto Rico should be a front page story, and so should what is happening in St. Louis and how to fix it. But no one cares about fixing what's going on in St. Louis. And really, the mainstream media either both sides it or sides with the police, because those are the people who have the communications assistants piping out tweets and press releases to them and saying this, when the activists keep getting ignored. And just another example, at the mall, a reverend doctor, there were pictures of her on top of a police officer, because the police officer had her 13-year-old grandson, who is asthmatic, in a headlock. And you had people trying to defend the cops in that position. So it's obviously people will jump through hoops to protect the police state, to argue for it, even though it's right in front of them, the evidence, and blatantly obvious, and and they'll just say, no, that's not what I say. It's disgusting to me. So
I couldn't agree with you more, man. I really am serious. So, Mike, I want to talk to you. What do you got coming up this coming week as we go forward? What can we look to expect from you?
This week's been a week. Unfortunately, I'm trying to find a reliable outlet to put my work in, but that's unfortunately, with journalism, that's the state of affairs of what's going on in the media. But one of the stories I'm hoping to work on and to write is the former Baltimore mayor, Stephen Rawlings Blake. She settled with this ethics committee in Maryland to pay her. She used her campaign for things you're not supposed to use campaign funds for. One of them was buying box seats at a Ravens game. So she used campaign funds, campaign donations to do that. She paid herself back just $5,000. But when she left office, she had $450,000 in campaign funds. Now she has half of that, and she's not running. What she did was send all these different candidates and elected officials, donations from her own slush fund. And what she's doing now is going off to be a lobbyist. So she has her own campaign funds to, fund her lobbyist, and set herself up with some relationships with elected officials as a lobbyist. So that whole revolving door, this is a Democrat. The whole the thing that annoys me the most is stupid people who think the line of morality goes between Democrat and Republican, when if you know anything about politics, it's for the most part they're both highly unethical, highly corrupt, and beholden to corporate donors, corporate interests. The style in which they do that is usually what defers them, in addition to a few stances on social issues. Just reporting stories like that. There was another story from earlier this week that Michigan passed a campaign finance law that basically takes Citizens United and moves it forward another couple steps, where consultants, lawyers, these people, anyone can work for a campaign and a super PAC simultaneously in Michigan. And now you can have unlimited amount of money going to these PACs, and you can have people in the campaign working directly for the PACs. So any caps on campaign donations was like $1,000 for state representative and like $6,000 for governor. Those are gone. And there's no outrage. No one is manufacturing outrage to that. It's just that whatever bullshit is out there, what Trump said, or things like that. He having like a little against John McCain and him, like that kind of drama. They're not covering the issues. So when ridiculous legislation like that happens, or even leading up to it, they're not using their resources, or the media isn't using their resources or their access to voters and people by informing them of this is bad, this is happening, and this is what you can do to stop it. You know, that's not what they're there for. So I'm going to work on those stories for the rest of this week.
All right. Well, Mike, with that, I'm going to go ahead and just say thank you so much for the opportunity to talk tonight. It's been a while, and I'm looking forward to doing this on a weekly basis. I think this is good stuff. Anyway, without further ado, Mike, audience, farewell, everybody. Have a great night tonight. Love you.
All right. You too. Thank you.
Yep.